This story took place in the autumn of 2022. I was working a job that most people didn't even know existed. I was a system monitor for an automated micro-fulfillment center in a light industrial district outside of Philadelphia. Basically, it was a ghost warehouse. There were no pickers or packers, just hundreds of tall metallic shelving units and a fleet of about 50 small orange robots that zipped around the floor, picking up bins and bringing them to a central port where they were loaded onto delivery vans. My job was to sit in a glass-walled booth overlooking the floor from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., making sure the software didn't glitch and clearing any robot jams that happened. I was the only human in the building. It was an incredibly sterile, eerie environment. There were no lights on the warehouse floor. The robots used infrared sensors to navigate, so I just looked out into a sea of moving shadows and blinking green status lights. The only sound was the constant low-frequency hum of electric motors and the occasional clack-clack-clack of a robot docking. In November, the system started acting up. Every night around 3 a.m., I'd get a weight discrepancy alert on my monitor. One of the bins in Section C, the deep back of the warehouse, would suddenly register as being 20 pounds heavier than it should be. Then, a few minutes later, the weight would return to normal. I assumed it was a sensor calibration issue. I'd remote restart the bin and the error would clear. But after 4 nights of this, I decided I had to go out there and manually inspect the bin. I grabbed my flashlight, opened the heavy security door, and stepped onto the warehouse floor. The robots sensed my presence and paused, their green lights turning amber. It was freezing out there to keep the servers cool. I made my way to Section C, row 14. I found the bin in question, lowered it from the rack using the manual override, and looked inside. It was empty, just as the inventory suggested. But as I shined my light around the bottom of the bin, I saw a single crumpled up wrapper for a protein bar. It was a brand we didn't stock in the warehouse. I felt a weird chill that had nothing to do with the AC. I checked the logs. No one had been in or out of the warehouse in 18 hours. I threw the wrapper away, reloaded the bin, and went back to my booth. The next night, the obstruction alert went off. A robot in Section C had stopped because its path was blocked. I checked the camera feed, but since it was infrared, everything looked like a grainy grayscale blur. I couldn't see anything on the floor. I went back out. When I reached the spot, I found a pile of shipping blankets, the heavy quilted ones used to wrap furniture. We didn't even use those blankets in this facility. I stood there in the dark, my flashlight beam shaking. "Hello?" I called out. My voice echoed off the high corrugated metal ceiling. No one answered. I moved the blankets and went back to the booth, but this time I didn't sit down. I started scrolling through the past 48 hours of security footage, specifically looking at the blind spots, the areas where the shelving was too dense for the cameras to see clearly. In a corner of Section D, behind a massive power transformer, I saw a flicker of movement from 3 hours ago. It wasn't a robot, it was a person. They were moving with a strange, hunched-over gait, staying low to the ground, almost mirroring the movements of the robots to avoid triggering the motion sensor lights. I watched as the figure climbed the side of a 15-foot shelving unit with terrifying speed and disappeared into the top-tier bins. I didn't call the police right away. I was so convinced it was a glitch or a trick of the light that I wanted to be sure. I zoomed in on the footage and waited. After 10 minutes, the figure reappeared. He was sitting on top of a shelving unit, looking directly at the camera. He wasn't wearing a mask. It was a man, maybe in his 30s, with a completely shaved head and a blank, wide-eyed expression. He was holding one of the warehouse's handheld scanners. As I watched the live feed, I saw him press a button on the scanner. My monitor in the booth chirped. A new alert. Manual override, bin 402, moving to loading port. Bin 402 was the massive industrial-sized bin right underneath my booth. I watched the man on the screen. He wasn't looking at the scanner anymore. He was looking up toward the glass booth, toward me. He knew exactly where I was. Then the warehouse lights, the ones I controlled from my desk, suddenly flickered on. The hack had hacked into the local network using the handheld scanner. He was standing on the catwalk now, just 30 feet away from the booth. I dove for the phone to call 911, but the line was dead. The smart building system had been compromised. The doors to my booth, which were controlled by an electronic strike, suddenly clicked, unlocked. I didn't have a weapon. I grabbed the heavy fire extinguisher from the wall and backed into the corner. The door to the booth slid open. The man didn't run at me. He just stood in the doorway, drenched in the harsh fluorescent light. He looked at my desk, at the half-eaten sandwich I had there, and then back at me. "You're late with the 4 a.m. report," he said. His voice was flat, devoid of any emotion. I didn't say a word. I just sprayed the fire extinguisher. The white chemical powder filled the small booth, blinding him. I pushed past him, ran down the stairs, and sprinted for the emergency exit. Unlike the main doors, the emergency exit had a physical crash bar. I hit it, the alarm shrieked, and I didn't stop running until I reached my car. The police arrived in 6 minutes. They found the booth filled with white powder, but the man was gone. When they searched the warehouse, they found a living space built into the very top level of Section D shelving. He'd been living there for at least 2 months. He tapped into the warehouse's power to charge his electronics and had been ordering food by manipulating the automated delivery vans, essentially stealing a portion of the groceries that were being packed for customers. But the most disturbing find was his control center. He had a laptop hooked up to the warehouse's internal server. He hadn't just been watching the robots, he had been recording me. He had thousands of hours of footage of me sitting in that booth. He even used the warehouse's high-fidelity microphones to record my phone calls to my parents and my girlfriend. He labeled the files by date and mood. October 12th, narrator is sad. October 19th, narrator is bored. They never caught him. He had escaped through a roof hatch before the police cordoned off the building. I quit the next morning. The company tried to offer me a raise to stay, but I couldn't even look at the building without feeling sick. I work in a small, traditional bookstore now. No robots, no smart systems, no infrared cameras, just paper and ink. Sometimes, when I'm closing up for the night, I'll hear a mechanical clack in the back room, maybe just a heater turning on or a floorboard settling, and I'll find myself looking up at the ceiling, wondering if there's a blind spot I missed.